The Freeway Killer, also known as William Bonin. William Bonin was an American serial killer known as the Freeway Killer and Freeway Strangler. Between 1979 and 1980, he murdered multiple young men and boys who were between the ages 17 and 21. He was arrested in 1980, tried and convicted in separate Orange County and Los Angeles County cases, and was executed in 1996. William Bonin was born in Willimantic, Connecticut in 1947. His early years were troubled. His father reportedly abandoned the family when William was young, and his childhood was described as unstable. This showed that he experienced neglect and problems in school. Bonin left home when he was a teenager and drifted between jobs and locations. When he became a young adult, he moved to California. He wasn't married during this time or hasn't shown any interest in women, so I've saw through sources. During the 1960s, he served in the United States Air Force. Reports stated that William had disciplinary problems during his service. According to court records and interviews, his behavior while in the Air Force included criminal sexual misconduct, for which he was punished and eventually discharged for. By the 1970s, Bonin had developed a pattern of sexually abnormal behavior and had prior arrests and sentences for sexual offenses and related crimes. He then spent time in prison for earlier sex crimes before the murders, for which he was later prosecuted for. The murders associated with Bonin occurred between 1979 and 1980 in Southern California. He then died on February 23, 1996, due to lethal injection. The bodies from Bonin's murders were left near freeways or areas that were visible from open roads. Basically, like places that are like clearly visible for people to see while they're driving on the freeway. Which is why he was called the Freeway Killer, as described. Bonin's victims were teenage boys and young men, including hitchhikers and runaways, who were young males. The crimes involved sexual assault and strangulation. Then Bonin would leave the bodies in public places. It was also determined that Bonin sometimes worked with accomplices to help commit and dispose of his crimes, those being Vernon Butts, Gregory Miley, William Pooh, I think I pronounced that last name right, and James Monroe. Vernon Butts assisted Bonin in at least 6 to 9 murders. He then committed suicide by hanging himself in jail while he was awaiting trial. Gregory Miley was involved in 2 of Bonin's murders as part of a plea bargain. Miley then testified against Bonin to avoid the death penalty. Instead, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. He was then beaten to death by another inmate at Mole Creek State Prison. William Pooh, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that last name right, was charged with one of Bonin's murders. He confessed that he was involved in 2 murders, actually. He was then sentenced for 6 years in prison for manslaughter and was later released. James Monroe was involved in the murder of 2 boys and was in a plea bargain. He then pled guilty in one of the murders in return for a shorter sentence. He was then sentenced to 15 years to life and stayed imprisoned. William fits into the category of both organized and disorganized because his methods were both brutal and chaotic, but he also tried to stay organized to avoid being caught, which is why he had accomplices to help him in his cases, because, And based on Bonin's crimes of killing young males, his murders were mostly driven by a desire for having power over his victims, or to show dominance, which makes him a power-oriented serial killer because he targeted vulnerable victims often them being hitchhikers. He used violence and dominance over his victims, and his motives were mostly around him being in control. So, overall, him killing his victims were mostly him wanting control over his victims, or just to be like dominant over them. I don't know why, but I think it's like due to his childhood trauma or like what he's gone through as he was like young. That's what I think. His approach to committing these murders were both psychoanalytic and behavioral, because Bonin had a troubled childhood that involved abuse and neglect. Again, like I said earlier, it was probably because of his early childhood. Early trauma might have affected him to where he wanted to have a sense of power, and his acts of murder could be an expression of rage. I can see that this could be an expression of rage, because during his childhood he had to go through his dad leaving him, and I can see how that could show an expression of rage. So yeah, that would make sense. His thrill for power might have strengthened his behavior during his crimes. Again, that could be, again, that goes along with him being like enraged and whatnot. I think the reasons why he killed and why specifically he chose young males as his victims, which is to have like a sense of control due to his traumatic childhood. Again, like I said before, he targeted young males because I think that he thought that they would be like more of an easy target to like gain control over or dominance. I also think that his past trauma might have motivated him to want to commit these crimes. So yeah, he basically just wanted to like, have dominance over his victims and then end up killing them and then sexually assaulting them, or sexually assaulting them then killing them, whichever order he did it. And yeah. That's about it.